Thank you, everyone, for your patience and being here with us today. This is a tremendous and wonderful occasion to celebrate this literary juggernaut, I like to call her, for everything she has already contributed and the things that are to come in her career. What a fantastic Saturday and time to be here. I am going to start with the bio. I'm going to read a little bit of the insert on this book from the Legacy. And then I'm going to hand the floor over to the woman, when you say her name, you got to put the in front of it, because that's how important she is to us. That's how treasured she is to us. So let's get cracking with this bio. Bear with me because I'm reading off of a laptop. Nikki Grimes is a New York Times bestselling author and the recipient of the Children's Literature Legacy Award, the Virginia Hamilton Literary Award, and the NCTE Award for Excellence in Poetry for Children. Her distinguished works include the NAACP Image Award nominee, Planet Middle School, Coretta Scott King Award winner, Bronx Masquerade, Coretta Scott Author Honor books, Jazmin's Notebook, Talkin About Bessie, Dark Suns, The Road to Paris, and The Words with Wings, which was also named an ALA notable book, and What is Goodbye, an ALA notable book. She lives in Corona, California. If you want more information about her, you can go to her website, www.nikkigrimes.com. That's NIKKIGRIMES.com. Welcome. We are here. We are doing the thing. Let me get back to this page. Okay, cool. So I'm going to just read a little bit from the insert of Legacy, Women Poets of the Harlem Renaissance, which is my favorite era of American history. Love the Harlem Renaissance. And what a tremendous thing to do. This book is a follow-up to another book, but this book is your original idea, but we'll dig into that later. I'm going to read just a little bit about you and this book out of here, the inside flap, which I hope all of y'all are buying this book today. Children's literature legend Nikki Grimes returns to Harlem Renaissance in this one-of-a-kind celebration of some of the period's greatest Black women poets. That's what we are, Black women poets. Beloved and multi-award-winning poet Nikki Grimes once again spotlights the glory of the Harlem Renaissance in this breathtaking follow-up to her critically acclaimed One Last Word. Taking inspiration from the unsung women poets of the era, Grimes uses the golden shovel poetry method to create original poems drawn from the words of Georgia Douglas Johnson, Effie Lee Newsom, Mae V. Cowdery, and many more breathtaking women writers. Set alongside the original works, Grimes' all-new poetry pays tribute to the unique heritage of these women and their spiritual connection to nature, illuminating female self-expression in the early 20th century, reinvented with contemporary relevance and context. Each set of poems is paired with beautiful, full-color illustrations created by some of today's most exciting Black women artists, adding unique points of view to this important volume. Legacy is a modern classic, I agree, that tells the story of Black female experience, past and present, and is sure to inspire generations to come. Just saying that. So this is the cover one more time. Miss Nikki Grimes, welcome, and I'm going to be quiet and listen as you pour out jewels of wisdom.
Thank you. Well, the first Golden Shovel poem in the collection is one by Mae V. Cowdery called Heritage. And I responded to it with a poem of my own called Before. Before we were women, we were our daddy's daughters, the dark princesses who stole our father's hearts. A single story says they gave us little except disappointment, but ask us. Ask me and I'll chronicle the currency of love Dad splurged on me, the gift of yes, you can, and modeling dignity in the face of vile attacks on his manhood without ever shedding his humanity or surrendering to sorrow. Like many dark fathers, He'd reclaim his soul in the sweet strains of a lesson we daughters learned, siphon sadness through a song. That poem is one I wrote with lines borrowed from little-known poet Maybe Cowdery. You'll find her in Legacy, Women Poets of the Harlem Renaissance. A companion of One Last Word. When One Last Word was released a few years ago and was overwhelmingly met with praise and acclaim, I was thrilled, largely because in my heart of hearts, I've been cradling the dream of a golden shovel collection featuring women poets of the Harlem Renaissance. Thanks to the success of One Last Word, this passion project was suddenly viable. By now, some of you are asking, what exactly is a golden shovel? In golden shovel poetry, you borrow one or more lines from an existing poem, laying the words one by one in the right margin, and then creating new lines, each ending in one of those words. If the line you choose has 3 words, for instance, you would end up with a new 3-line poem. If the original line has 5 words, the resulting poem would be 5 lines long, and so on. It's a form designed to stretch your mental muscles, to be sure, and that's precisely what I love about it. I'm a glutton for punishment, but only of the literary variety. Golden shovel poetry was originally created by poet Terrence Hayes to honor the work of Gwendolyn Brooks in a collection titled The Golden Shovel Anthology, which I highly recommend, by the way. I was honored to be one of its contributors. And once I tried this form, I immediately started looking for projects in which I could experiment with this form further. One Last Word was the first of my books to result from that exploration. I've since done the same in the picture book story, The Watcher, and now in Legacy. This book, written by women, illustrated by women, and about women, was a work of pure joy. Joy shakes me like the wind that lifts a sail, wrote Clarissa Scott Delaney in her poem, Joy. And I answered with Leah's Reunion. Yearly, I join the celebration of woman joy, the blessing of unchecked tears when calamity shakes us or when beauty surprises, the comfort of sisters cradling me when death slithers into the neighborhood like a rattler, striking yet another sweet sun, the promise of him broken. But there is also the cleansing wind of deep belly laughter as we gather round that love-worn kitchen table, licking morsels of each story that lifts us. Without this maternal crew's guidance, a brown girl like me would simply be adrift. No wind, no sail. I might never have discovered Delaney's joy, or my own, had I not found her while doing research for this book. Our stories and the record of our accomplishments are often hidden. If the history we are taught were poured into a cup, you'd find that cup half empty. The histories of women would be largely missing. And yet, if you take even the smallest spoon and begin to dig into all of history, you'll quickly discover records of remarkable women the world over, women that few of us are aware of. That's as true in the realm of literature as it is in any other arena. When it comes to the Harlem Renaissance, most well-read people can readily tick off the names of a few Harlem Renaissance poets like Countee Cullen, Paul Laurence Dunbar, and of course, Langston Hughes. However, ask these same readers to cite women poets of the period, and the sound you hear will be crickets. Yet, begin to dig where academics like Maureen Honey, L.T. Dungeon have gone, and you'll meet 30, 40, 50 or more women of the Harlem Renaissance you never knew existed. We shouldn't be surprised. It's always been a challenge to find records of the accomplishments of Black women, even those who were writers. Zora Neale Hurston is mandatory reading in schools nationwide today. But that's only because Alice Walker rescued her from history's dustbin. Likewise, there's a long list of women poets from the Harlem Renaissance, of whom many are unaware. In these pages, you will meet some of the remarkable female poets and groundbreaking women of the Harlem Renaissance who created alongside of and often nurtured the male poets we know. They didn't all produce poetry collections of their own, but each played an integral part in this historic era in America. There are so many. Angelina Weld Grimke is one who wrote short stories, essays, plays, as well as poetry. She wrote unflinchingly about lynchings and all manner of violence against her people, but she also turned her literary attention to love and nature. In Legacy, I featured Grimke's short poem, Dusk, which begins, "Twin stars through my purpling pain." That arresting line led me to write the poem, Vanish. I could vanish were it not for the twin streetlights outside my window, imitating stars. Without their brightness, you'd peer through half-open blinds and find barely an outline of my blue-black body, skin purpling toward midnight, my image invisible as a glass pane. Blanche Taylor Dickinson was another poet whose work inspired me. Though considered a true beauty herself, Dickinson's poems address the pain of Black women who feel invisible and ugly when compared to white standards of beauty. Her themes were powerful and all too familiar. I especially loved her poem, Four Walls, which ended with the lines, "Four walls to rise and pen me in, this conscious world with guarded men." And I responded with, "What girls can do." Mr. Spencer thinks I don't notice the four negative notions he constructs like walls, boxing us in. Girls can't, shouldn't, won't, wouldn't. To him, a girl's only purpose is helping a boy rise to his potential, as if girls are devoid of skill and promise. Ha! Men tried putting Shirley Chisholm in a pen. Mae Jemison and Misty Copeland, too. Now me? No. I'll decide what I'll be, what box, if any, I fit in. Effie Lee Newsome also caught my eye. Her body of work was primarily focused on the young. In Legacy, I included her poem, The Bronze Legacy, to a Brown Boy. "'Tis a noble gift to be brown, all brown," her poem begins. And later come the lines, "Eagles are of this same hue." I thank God then I am brown. Brown has mighty things to do. And so I borrowed the line, "Eagles are of the same hue," and responded with the poem, Like an Eagle. No one chooses his pigment, but note, eagles share the glistening shades of bronze my folk are blessed with. This sun-drenched color is all the rage of generations who've baked on beaches for a bit of this glow. I know it's unseemly to boast. All the same, I wouldn't trade my melanin skin for any other hue. This collection also gave me the opportunity to share poetry that featured Black people engaging with nature, something we rarely get to see in children's literature, which is a space I'd like to help fill. And so I was happy to include poems by Anne Spencer, who was an avid gardener, a passion we both share. One of the poems that blossomed from her hours in the garden was, "Earth, I thank you." I immediately fell in love with the opening lines. "Earth, I thank you for the pleasure of your language." And I took that line and ran with it in Sweet Sisters. Clay creatures, we forget our sisterhood with earth as if we could survive without her nourishment. I know better, but did I always? I thank her now. Sink your teeth into a peach and so will you. Imagine a world without rosemary or rose, even for a moment. Where would the flavor or the fragrance be? How we'd miss the quiet pleasure earth brings to nose and tongue, of which we are not worthy. Earth, your generosity deserves to be met with love's language. The women you meet in this collection should also be met with love's language. They include some of the first Black female PhDs. They were teachers, librarians, directors of cultural institutes. They hosted art salons and edited some of the literary magazines and anthologies that featured the work of Cullen, Dunbar, and Hughes, as well as their female counterparts. Everywhere you look, there is literary gold to be found among women who deserve to be celebrated. I want young readers to know that such women existed. I hope readers will be inspired to do a bit of digging on their own. The poems I selected for Legacy always ended up being poems that made me feel a certain way, poems that immediately struck me, poems with lines that would sink their hooks into me and never let go. I remember coming across a line in a poem by Gertrude Parthenia McBrown that affected me that way. In her poem, Jehovah's Gesture, there was one line that I just couldn't shake. The line was, "A hurricane of souls." One morning I woke up with that line stuck in my head like an earworm, and I suddenly understood that for me, those were the souls of children living in cages at the Mexican border. They were the souls caught in the hurricane, trapped in the storm. And once I understood that, I was able to respond in judgment. Caged innocence. We study the heavens for a lightning bolt of justice, a hurricane of grace towards parents whose sole sin is love of us and freedom. Our sin? Being labeled disposable souls. That's how I came to include and write a response to one of the poems in Legacy. In another case, I went on the hunt for a specific line in a poem that would allow me to write about climate change because it is such a major issue of our time. While working on this collection, I found a line in a poem by Angelina Well Grimke that took me where I wanted to go. Her poem is titled At the Spring Dawn, and it includes the line, "And the red sun shouldered his way up." And the minute I saw a red sun, my mind immediately went to the ozone layer. And I responded with, faithful. The punctured ozone layer bleeds radiation, and we offer complaint without apology for the years of desecration Earth has suffered. Red is no longer the color of jubilation, but warning. The sun will now allow wildfires to run rampant. Nature shouldered the brunt of man's mistreatment too long. Now it's his turn to pay. Even so, it is the way of creation to be faithful. Notice, each dawn, the sun comes up. The themes that Grimke and all the other poets in Legacy wrote about have as much resonance now as they did when they were first written. Esther Popel's poem, Flag Salute, a dark commentary on the Pledge of Allegiance, could have been written today with a special dedication to Colin Kaepernick. I responded to it with a mother's lament. Ancestral blood waters cotton fields and the earth I stand on. A history begun under lash, no pledge of liberty until war forced it. My people's allegiance to country was wrung from hearts of hope to one day be treated equal to the sons of the ones who shipped us naked to these shores under freedom's flag. Legacy offers a wealth of entry points with topics including race, identity, social justice, equity, women's rights, immigration, climate change, and of course, the Harlem Renaissance. Legacy is a perfect place to spark conversation, laugh a little, cry a little, and learn something along the way.
I do love that poem, and I was actually going to talk to you a little bit about some of these poems where you talk about mother to children relationship and this idea of during this season of the grief of losing children, because that's what it's been so much of. So if you want to take it from there, we will listen to you again.
Sure. And this is from the poem, Esther Popel's poem, Flag Salute, a dark commentary on the Pledge of Allegiance, and it could have been written. Ancestral blood waters cotton fields and the earth I stand on. A history begun under lash, no pledge of liberty until war forced it. My people's allegiance to country was wrung from hearts of hope, to one day be treated equal to the sons of the ones who shipped us naked to these shores under freedom's flag. One of my favorite pieces in the collection.
Thank you so much for sharing. At this time, is it okay if we move into the Q&A, or do you have a few more words before we move into that? Okay.
I'm good for Q&A.
Awesome. So everyone, feel free to start typing your questions to us. And like I said, our organizer, Sarah, will grab them. And thank you so much, Sarah, for all the work you're doing. Also want to remind everyone, just as Sarah said in the chat, that you can buy your books from Nowhere Bookshop and just click on the Buy Books tab and get to buying these wonderful books. So with this idea of the golden shovel method that you were using, did you ever get a chance to talk to Terrence Hayes about it, or when you started? Obviously you did, because you're a part of an anthology that he invited you to be a part of. Is there anything that you want to tell us about that process and maybe a conversation with him?
Actually, I never had a conversation with him. Okay. So it would be interesting to find out what he thinks about what I did with this forum afterwards. But I haven't had a conversation with him as such. Yeah. Okay. Once I did this one poem, though, I was in love with the whole process. I thought, I have to do this again. What can I do this with? And at the time, I happened to have been exploring women poets of the Harlem Renaissance, just out of interest, because I read a lot of poetry. And one day I just asked myself, where are the women? I mean, I knew Georgia Douglas Johnson and Jessie Redmond Fawcett and Gwendolyn Bennett, and it kind of trailed off there. I was like, there gotta be more. And so I started looking. Yeah. And so that happened around the same time that I learned this form and experimented with it, and then the two came together. I thought this would be a great way to explore this poetry. Yeah.
I think it's awesome. You know, if you go through this book, you put so much TLC into this book, and even in the back, you have the information, the biographies of these women, and you go through and you tell us about them. I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to put their biographies in here. And even if you go further back into the book, your works cited index, where you talk about where you gathered this information. Is there any information you want to tell us? Like, if we wanted to go down the beautiful rabbit hole of finding women writers from the Harlem Renaissance, where, besides just hitting Google, where could we start to look into that information?
Well, I did provide information in the book. I mean, more than that, I wouldn't know what to say. But there are some just fabulous collections in the academic track that you wouldn't necessarily look for. And that's where I found a lot of this information. What was it? Shadow Dreams was an excellent source for poetry. There was a wonderful collection that featured African American poetry on nature. There are a few sources, and can certainly go to Schomburg and do some researching there. So the sources are out there. My surprise was how many women there were. Because I was like, there got to be at least like 10, 15, 20, Yeah, it's more like 60, 70, 80. It's like a lot of women. I could not include them all. And the biographies were really important to me. I'm really grateful to my publisher for extending me the space to do that, because I usually don't. Usually just, I have a few lines. But I was like, these readers are being introduced to these women, many of them for the very first time. It's really important for me that they know who these women were, know about their educational background. They were in their own right on so many different levels. You travel overseas. One of them had studied in the Sorbonne. They just had really substantial backgrounds that I wanted readers to know about, and to have them, to be reading about a woman who was, one of the first Black women to earn a PhD at that time. Pretty outstanding. And a reader coming to that then walks away and can say, well, if she was able to do that then, what's possible for me now? And throw those doors open. So those biographies were really important to me.
Cool. So did you interview anyone in the process of creating this book? Is there anyone that you got a chance to speak to that you would want to tell us about?
No.
Okay.
No. It was all academic.
I think it's wonderful that you chose to just dig in the way that you did. And I would say, if there was a woman from your collection that was alive today that you could speak to, is there anyone that you would want to talk to or want to ask about her life and the poems that she wrote, and not just go off of the beautiful text that she created for us?
Oh, no, that's a good question. I'd like to speak with all of them, of course, but maybe particularly Clarissa Scott Delaney, because she didn't get to write many poems. She wasn't with us very long, and yet her was remarkable. I think I'd like to have a conversation with her. Yeah.
That's so awesome. Okay, so I feel like it's really, I'm gonna just talk the way I talk. I think it's so dope that you entitled your book Legacy and you won a Legacy Award for this literature here. What type of legacy do you want these young readers to have? Because when I look at all of your work, even thinking about the book that you just recently wrote about Kamala, it's a historical book. It should be studied as text in school. It's super exciting, but at the same time, it's history. You are documenting so much important history, and you load it up in a small space of just a few pages. You load it up. So what kind of legacy do you want? Like, what do you want young women to take away from your books as they read?
Well, first of all, the Legacy award I already had. It was because that's for body of work, and I won that in 2017. Yay! So it happened, but so it worked out nice that it also worked in with the title of this book. I don't really think very much about legacy per se. I'm so involved with the work that's in front of me and making sure it is the very best that it can be, and doing work that excites me, work that I feel there's a need for, work that can inspire, that can encourage, that can inform the young people who read it. And I feel legacy is something for someone else to determine when they look back on work. I'm just busy getting the work done. Yeah. And I love studying history. It's funny though. I always say every time I do something that's historically related that I will never do another one. because it's just, I go down a rabbit hole every single time, and there's always a point at which my editor has to sort of shake my chain and remind me, you're supposed to be writing a book here, because I'm like, yeah, but I found this and I found this other thing. And,
Right.
with this book, for instance, I got really excited when I discovered that Effie Lee Newsome and Gertrude Parthenia McBrown, especially, had focused so much work on poetry for children during that period, because I had never heard about that. And so that sent me down certain rabbit holes. And then, and then I found out about the Brownies book, and I came across some other unpublished work for children by these various poets. And I was like, oh, this is great. And of course, since I specialize in books for children and young adults, I got really excited about this. But that wasn't the point of this book. So I had to sort of yank myself back in the moment, like, okay, we'll get to that later. Let's just focus on this right now. So that's kind of what happens whenever I'm doing research.
Right. It's just like being a fan and just wanted to take the time to enjoy the works that you're reading. And, it's painstaking process to say, what am I going to edit down to? What am I going to share? And what am I going to put out there in the world? And I just think that it's wonderful that you took the time to do that. I want to look at, if we can, on page 50 of your book is the poem Kneel. It's got to be one of my favorites in this book, because I feel like you talk about the garden and how it's a place of creation, and you link it to writing in the place of creation there. And the very last line, it's like I could sink into that line like it's a comforter and wrap myself in it, because it's just so beautiful. Could we share this poem with everyone?
Sure. In search of verse, enter a garden and kneel. Feel the sun-kissed clay between thumb and forefinger. If you're surprised by the wriggling life form in the midst, a curly brown creature, her for doing her worm work, turning your soil into gold, her sentient sacrifice of time unmeasured until now. Meditate on the gifts the earth will furnish, assuming nourishment, light, and life's clear elixir, the water which satisfies, soothes, tickles. What wet word pours itself into the vessel that you call thought? Be still till your imagination tells you which picture it wants you to paint. This is the lyrical word journey of the poet. Pace yourself. Watch the bee slowly gathering what fragrant nectar he can find worthy of a hive and its queen. Now, slowly, gather words for a poem of a honey-glazed treat. Isn't that what a poem is?
Yep. Everything you say. Honey glazed treat. I love it. And I was just like, that's what poetry is, like taking the time to gather these nutrients. And I want to ask you, who nourishes your words? Like, who in your life has nourished your words over time, which is going to lead us into, I think, a question that we have in the chat.
You mean like other poets?
Other poets, mentors, people in your life. Who would you say has nourished your words, and how did they nourish you?
Well, I guess the first most important impact came from James Baldwin, who was my initial mentor. And it's so funny, my specialty is poetry, but I didn't start off, I started off with James Baldwin, whose work is nonetheless very lyrical. So there is absolutely that aspect of it. And he encouraged me and talked to me about the importance of doing work that you're proud of never compromising in the area of your giftedness, and the importance of just maintaining integrity in the work that you do. And also the importance of mastering your tool, which is language. And so all of that, of course, feeds into poetry. And then I just had a garden of poets around me as a young person. I was running with Nikki Giovanni and Sonia Sanchez and Jane Cortez and spent time with oh my gosh, Quincy Troop. I think that was the first poetry workshop I did was with Quincy. So there were a lot of wonderful influences. And then there are the poets themselves. I love Lucille Clifton. Lucille Clifton, I could read her all day, every day. There are a number of other poets, of course, who definitely feed my soul, but up there at the top of the list for sure. So yeah.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you sharing that with us. And so that's a tremendous list of individuals who are very high in all of our hearts. So I just want to go to this chat because there is a good question in the chat that I would like to ask you to share if you have some information on this one. Have you talked with teachers about using the golden shovel strategy in their classrooms? I'll ask you that, and then I'll ask the second question that goes with that in a minute.
Well, I certainly encourage them to. Over the years, I've done a few poetry salons. I've done it in elementary and middle school and high school level. And I found all those students just dove right into the form. There's something really wonderful about having a place to begin instead of just going to a blank page that really gives them the confidence to just dig in there. And so from time to time, teachers will send me golden shovel poetry that their students have written, which I just love. So so I find that you give that form to a young person and they will take it and run and come up with their own stories, and I just love that.
And from now on, I am going to definitely use it. I always tell kids to use a hotline. I call them hotlines. You call it striking lines, but I'm like, take a hotline from this and expound upon it. But the idea of making sure that every sentence ends with a word is even more challenging for them, and kids love a good challenge. Do you have any? Yeah, it is. It is. And it's like you're inserting, it's kind of like those little Mad Lib books that we used to get when, we were little, just trying to like figure out how to ways that I can put that in, like you say, a puzzle. Do you have any advice for teachers or educators with, maybe even in context of your book and how they could share legacy with their students?
Not in particular. I mean, I just, challenge students to write their own golden shovels. They might choose a line from the book, but they can also, one of the things I love about this form, it's so adjustable and adaptable. You can take a favorite line of a song that you love, choose a lyric. It can be a line from a short story. It doesn't even have to be poetry. Maybe there's a line, in a novel you've read or in a collection of short stories, some line that really sort of spoke to you, that sparks something in you. And you can take that line and run with it and create a poem, from there. So sort of the sky is the limit with these things. I mean, the lines that I've chosen are lines that all have a sense of story to them. They either have stories embedded in them, or they suggest stories, or they're lines that sort of take you somewhere in your imagination. The gift of shedding sorrow in a song, like crumpled silver and the stinging winds. Those are lines that said, run with it. And there are lines that I didn't follow that were also great, like wild winds pregnant with slanting rain. You start to just dig into, well, what is that? What could that mean? What could that be about? And you find story there. And there are things that, I don't know, just find that line that triggers something. what I do within my, when I've done poetry salons is I have given students a number of short poems in which there were lines like that, and give them the opportunity to select whatever line speaks to them out of those poems, and you know, and then to take it and run with their own story, and that works really well. It's good to have those options because everybody's going to respond to something differently,
Right. Yeah.
you know. So, but the great thing is, even if they only had one line and they all wrote poems using that one line, every single one would write a different poem.
Absolutely, because of our experiences being so vastly different. And I really think that that's beautiful. I think a good example of that, and this is going to be the last thing I say because we got to wrap up, a prelude, the poem Prelude on page 87, going into Slow Burn. I feel like those poems have, you know, when I read Prelude, it gave me a sensual feeling. And then when I read Slow Burn, I thought of a whole nother vibe about our, you know, what it's like to be Black in this time, a woman of color in this time, and the volcano that's within all of us. And I love learn to harness the lava-like heat I feel. Lava-like heat I feel. That line, and it's the last line, but I mean, there's so many, like, I love the word brazen. That's one of my favorite words. But just the beauty of it, and then the art. We didn't even get a chance to talk about the art that accompanies the you know, the book. But I'm telling you all, y'all really need to pick up this book, Legacy. And I would mad dash to page 87 and 88 if I were y'all to read those two poems, because they're so beautiful and they evoke so much amazing imagery. But I just want to say thank you so much for your time with us today. I know it's been trying and frustrating, but everyone, thank you for sticking in with us, and it was worth it. It was worth every second to just have just a few minutes of your time and hear your beautiful voice speak these words, and all of the beautiful legacy that you've created through your body of work, and including this one. So, anything that you want to tell us before we close out, Nikki?
Stay tuned. I always have new exciting projects that I'm jumping into. I constantly walk into my fear, and so I'll be doing more of that in the coming months and years.
Yes.
Yeah.
So everyone, remember to click on that tab and buy this book, and also feel free to give donations so that this book festival can remain free to the public and everyone. Thank you, Nikki, for your time. You have a beautiful day, and I wish you more words and bigger dreams, and for everything that you're giving us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.